Well, hello again, everyone, and thanks a million for joining us in our new teleclass venture, Finding Peace with Carol Howe. Heaven knows people are surely looking for something stable and count-onable in these days of rapid change with unknown consequences. I know we normally are not crazy about unknown consequences. So our goal with this class is to provide that reliable and always present port in the storm for you. We want to remind you about how to feel peaceful at every step, no matter what's happening around you, and also of your unique and essential place in the universal scheme of things. And if you've lost track of that, we want to bring your awareness back to it. Today, the election is still on everyone's minds, either pro or con, mourning or celebrating, and all variations of emotional reaction in between. So it's crucial for all of us to know that our experience of peace and happiness is an inside job and is not caused by outside influences or others' behavior, triggered by absolutely, caused by no. Our peace cannot depart from our awareness without our cooperation in that forgetting process. And we often don't realize how we forget and how we are complicit in our own distress, which is why we must address this. I have found it personally such a huge help to realize that what I object to in others is always a reflection of something unhealed in me, something I'm still hanging on to, and learning to frame every dislike as a way to discover and then release something is just the gift of a lifetime, because my life just gets better and better as a result every single time, and it will for you too. We are so accustomed to believing and so conditioned to the idea that others cause our distress and lack of safety that we have to continue to provide an alternate point of view for your well-being. So today I'm going to talk with a young woman who is pleading for a different viewpoint. She writes that she feels wrecked, that's her word, by the election results and is feeling desperate for a new perspective. So now we invite you to listen in to our conversation as Leslie and I look at the actual source of her upset, humankind's common need for healing, and how she can change her mind and retain her peace in the face of challenging circumstances. So here we go. Enjoy. Hey there, Leslie. I'm so glad to talk to you. And boy, I think your message is one, or your question rather, is one that millions and millions of people have. I see that you wrote in that this election has just wrecked your peace of mind and that you recognize a really desperate need for another way to look at things. So why don't we just take this from the top and you can tell me what happened, when you think your distress started to sit in, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Carol. Thanks for answering my question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thought I was doing a really good job at keeping my peace of mind during this election. And that was until, I woke up and the results had come in. I honestly could not believe that, the other side won. So I guess my peace of mind was there as long as I thought my side was winning. And I honestly was just so certain that the entire Trump campaign that was seemingly promoting all of these negative messages of hate and division and fear, I just was so positive that would never come to fruition, that we would never elect a man like that. And so I just had just a certainty. And when I woke up on Wednesday morning to see the final results, I could not tell you how it completely wrecked my peace of mind. I started crying. I couldn't believe that this was happening to our country. I called friends and cried with them. I felt like it was almost how I felt after 9/11. And I know that sounds insanely dramatic, but that is how I reacted. And I know that I need to change my perspective and come at this a totally different way, but part of the feelings I'm also experiencing is knowing that half of the country voted this way. So half of the people I'm surrounded by are believing in this message of hate. And so it was just a very isolating moment for me. So I am hoping that you can provide me with a different way to look at this.
Well, one of the interesting first ways to look at this is that the other half of the country had that same kind of sickening, this can't really be happening, I'm left out, I don't count kind of feeling before the election. So you think, oh, I never thought about that. It's why so many people voted for him, because of their own distress, their own, I can't believe my life is working out the way it is. So what it amounts to is just we have a whole country full of people who are distressed about something. What do you think about that? That's one way to look at it. Like, in one sense, we're all in this together. You know, everybody is unhappy about, or at least most people are unhappy about the current circumstances. So you think...
Well, you know, I feel like they're delusional.
Well, see, that's the way human beings are. We tend to think our position is reasonable and theirs are delusional.
Right.
So, and that's probably always the way it's going to be with humankind. But the important thing now is to realize, what must we do to get you back to your own sense of peace of mind? And one of the things that I marvel at is how we as human beings, so to speak, seem to know so little about how to handle our emotional distress, because we have all grown up with a bias against it. Virtually everybody I talk to will acknowledge that, yes, somehow they feel like it's not okay to feel how they feel. What might be your comments about that?
Absolutely. I felt ashamed of my own reaction. I couldn't believe I was crying. I felt ashamed of that. I felt ashamed when I talked to my family and friends that I was so upset. And I think because I also was trying to work Wednesday, I did a lot of really trying to just push it down and act as if I was doing just fine. Of course,
absolutely.
Yes, yeah. Between conference calls, I was crying, and then I would get on and try to just put on a happy face.
And any number of people called me yesterday and indicated those who had this option, that they just couldn't go to work. In other words, they recognized that trying to live a normal life yesterday was beyond them. And not all of us have that option, where you can say, I'm going to stay home and process or something like that. But what you say brings up something that is so damaging to our peace of mind, and that is that we've grown up with the idea that if I display distress of any kind, it means something negative about me. I was talking to somebody the other day who had nothing to do with the election. It had something else entirely. And I said, what does this mean to you if you allow yourself to grieve or to be hurt? And it's like, well, it means I'm weak.
Yeah.
And between thinking it means I'm weak or I'm defective, or there's just generally something the matter with me, or I'll be humiliated, or I'll be attacked in some way. Here we have this natural process of our emotions being triggered by our thoughts, and we can look at that in a little bit. And then with this almost, at least in the Western world, this almost universal bias that you're not allowed for your emotional nature to be expressed. It's like this has a very crippling effect on our physical bodies, on our health, on our peace of mind, and it is absolutely a common problem to almost everybody. So it isn't just you. So I hope that that makes you feel a little bit better to realize this is not just you that's trying to bottle things up and finding it hard to do, and that the whole thing is just a mess. You've got lots and lots of company. What do you think about that?
That's good to know. I at least had half the country, right?
Yeah, well, yes, and millions more than that. So the first question then should be, all right, if I had such a strong emotional response to this, the first question should be, what do I actually do with my emotional response, rather than pretending like it's not there, trying to bottle it up, shove it under the rug where it absolutely will not stay, and it keeps popping up in all sorts of inappropriate ways. So don't you think that should be the first question? Like, how am I to respond?
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, first of all, to recognize that this is a learned prohibition. This is a learned bias against our own emotional natures. It's not inherent and it's not natural. If we didn't learn this, then we would be able to express things in a much more natural and free-flowing way. And if we did, these emotions would just, which is just energy, would reach their natural conclusions. We would be fine and we would move on. But since we do not allow that to occur, it stays and it festers and it grows, and we keep compounding it by doing other things to create other emotional responses, and we won't let it do what our physical bodies know what to do with this. And it's such a shame, because this is such an easily handled problem. If we hadn't made up this story that's been passed down from generation to generation, that it's not okay to be upset. It's really amazing in the damage that it causes across all of human beings, and how easily this could be fixed if we ever looked at it and asked ourselves this question: what is really the matter with feeling how I feel? And I had to learn all this myself. It's not like I had the proper kind of upbringing and knew all of this. In my household, everybody was supposed to be happy all the time, which is not possible to do. It's as if it would be a black mark on the family or something if anybody was ever upset. Like, being happy all the time was some sign of, I don't know, successful parenting on my parents' part, or being a successful family. In other words, it's not talked about. It's just modeled for us that we should just keep a stiff upper lip and always be happy when we aren't. So it's not so much that the words are spoken to us, it's that it's modeled for us. And when we're little, after all, we just replicate whatever we see and whatever we hear and presume, well, this is how life is. Only we don't presume it, because this is not a thought process. This is just instinctive. And so this tremendous bias against being how we actually are has to be unlearned. So just hearing that it's marvelous for you to have an emotional nature. To not have any emotions at all makes you rather robot-like. And the idea that you can have some and not others is equally as ridiculous. So just take a very deep breath right now and begin to honor the fact that you are a human being, you are dealing with a physical body, and all of these are natural processes, and they don't mean a thing about you or your worth or your goodness or your right to be here or your intelligence or anything else. What do you think?
Well, I feel so much better just having heard that from you, because I think what I've been beating myself up over is that you I don't know exactly why, but I feel like I should be stronger, and that's what I've been thinking about. I should be stronger and more resilient. Those are the two words that kept coming into my head.
And isn't that just amazing? Because then when you ask and you say, what makes having an emotional nature, how does that make you weak and inflexible, so to speak? In other words, we assume these things, but we never look to see if they're reasonable or not. In other words, nothing about this makes you inflexible. Nothing about this makes you weak or anything else. That would be like saying, I don't know what color eyes you are. Let's pretend like you've got brown eyes, but let's say having brown eyes makes you weak. And if I made that statement to you, you would say, well, that's the craziest thing I ever heard. I mean, you just have brown eyes if you have brown eyes, and people have emotional responses to things. So I hope that if nothing else, you will wrap your arms around yourself and say, I'm going to take care of myself when emotions come up. They come up for me. I mean, at least now I know what to do about them, and I know what causes them, which is what we'll address in a little bit. But we don't need to deal with what causes them until we can be comforted in knowing that having emotional responses is nothing negative at all about us, about our intelligence, about our ability, about our right to be here, or anything else. Any more than having brown eyes means something about you. If I said, because you've got brown eyes, you're weak, you would say, I think that's crazy. And it is. And this same other kind of bias we have is equally as crazy. So are you breathing deeply, I hope?
I am, and I feel better already.
Wonderful. Well, so now what I want us to take a look at is where these emotions come from in the first place. Because once they're with us, we need to know how to process them, which is to simply, and so we're going to look at this for a second, and that is to honor them, to allow them to be there, to take all of that pushing them away, remove that, and take a very opposite perspective, which is imagine that you're reaching out, putting your arms around them, bringing them closer to you. Like, I'm going to actually be with these emotions. I'm going to welcome them. They're here because they're telling me something. There's something I can learn from them. I need to incorporate them in my experience now because they are in my experience now. In other words, it doesn't do any good to be experiencing something and then pretend like I'm not. So just get the sense right now, in case there's any lingering anything, that you're just bringing them close to you instead of trying to push them away from you. Can you just do that?
I can. I am doing that right now, which
Okay.
is, of course, exactly the opposite of what I have been doing up to this moment, which has been trying my best to fight, scratch, and kick them as far away from me as possible.
And how well has that worked? Not well. So since that hasn't worked, well, on those grounds alone, we should be willing to take another perspective on things, because to continue to do something over and over and over in your life that doesn't work, at some point should be attention getting. For instance, have there been other times in your life? I mean, I'm sure I know the answer to this, but I have to ask you anyway. And that is, other times in your life when you have felt emotionally distraught over something, or disappointed, or hopeless, or sad, or something like that.
Absolutely.
And have you tried to push them away then?
Yes.
And did that work well?
Sometimes for a short period of time, but they eventually come to the surface no matter what you do.
Always they're there. They're going to be there until you simply stop fighting against it and you allow them to be there. And then it's like you open a door. It's like you open a dam where water is backed up behind it, and finally the water can flow. That's why you feel better now, because there is an opening, there's an acceptance, there's a flowing, and everything is great. So the question then to ask is, okay, if I get to be comfortable when I am upset, and it doesn't matter if it's whether you call it feeling grief or hopelessness or despair, if it's anger, you want to do some kind of physical activity if possible, because you've got a lot of adrenaline in the body, especially in the arms and legs, and you want to work that out. But all those other deeper things like hopelessness and grief and sadness and despair, you simply want to feel those feelings and keep in mind they have every right to be here. I have unwittingly created them, and we'll look to see how, but they have every right to be here. I welcome them. They can stay as long as they want, and all's right with the world. And when you do that, when you have that open attitude toward them, there are things opening in your, like cells are opening in your body when you have an opening attitude, and energy can move. See, right now, because you've been open, there is a more settled feeling in your body. Is that true?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. So then, since that's what happens once the emotions are triggered in the first place, and now we need to back up and we need to allow them to happen. And also, just to say this one other thing, while they're happening, no analysis. No, where did this come from? Why are they here? Who's responsible for this? When are they going to go away? What does this mean about me? What you want to do is to just turn off your intellectual thinking mind as you're just putting all your attention on feeling how you feel. Your thinking mind at this point in the process is a liability and not an asset, because it keeps the feeling from happening. Too much thinking is an addiction. It's like it's a medication that keeps us from feeling. So just right now, you realize, okay, for this few seconds, I don't have any need to think about anything. I just need to be here with myself. And that continues to settle, does it not?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
so now let's look at the cause of all this. Now, there are millions and millions of people who are believing the election results are the cause of my distress. And there are people who would fight to the very bitter end that, yes, indeed, these people are causing my distress, or person or situation causing my distress. And so I want to back up here and see if I can make this really clear. That other things and people and situations and animals and all the things that can happen in life can trigger our upset, but they cannot cause it. There's an enormous difference between triggering an upset and causing it. If we as humankind could ever get that straight, wow, we would all probably ascend right away. So you think, what does that mean? And here's why we're going to make the differentiation between somebody else or something else causing it and triggering it. The cause of our emotional states, whatever they may be, is an internal chemical process. So it's like I feel my voice slowing down. Like if I talk slower, maybe I don't do that on purpose, but maybe it will make more sense if I talk slower. But here's the process. Let's go back. You woke up in the morning and you thought, this can't be happening. There was this big sense of threat, like, oh my God, what's going to happen to us now? In other words, there was within you a sense of, we'll call it threat or danger.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so you felt endangered. Okay, there is built into the body is our stress response in the back part of the brain as compared to the front part of the brain, where we normally, if we're lucky, are operating our lives. A lot of times we're back in the back part when we don't need to be there. But so let's say that there is a system in the body built in, through the whole evolutionary process to take care of us, to keep us physically alive. It's a survival mechanism. So, to use my favorite analogy, if a saber-toothed tiger is about to jump in your living room window and get you, there needs to be a survival response in the body, and there is. It shuts down certain systems. It sends all the blood, and not all, but a large quantity of blood and everything else to the arms and the legs so that you can either fight or flee. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Obviously, that would make sense. In other words, that's how human beings have survived, is because we've been able to turn on, so to speak, that survival mechanism and get out of the way of predators, for instance, when we need to. Well, as we've developed over many centuries, of course, this survival mechanism has been hijacked by the ego mind. So that when the ego, that sense of self, the things that I care about, the things that are important to me, my values, my beliefs, and so on, when those feel threatened, we send the same signal to the brain. There's a threat. I'm endangered. That happens if the saber-toothed tiger is about to jump in the window. The brain doesn't know the difference in the kinds of threats that we signal to it. It has no way to say, oh, there's no saber-toothed tiger here. It's like, there's not a problem because this is just an idea of yours. In other words, that's not what happens. When we think thoughts that tell the brain, I'm endangered, it doesn't evaluate what kind of danger. It just says, okay, I'm to the rescue. And it changes the body chemistry greatly and dumps in adrenaline and cortical steroids, and it shuts down some functions of the body so all the energy can go to trying to stay alive. And that changed body chemistry flows throughout the body, is taken up through all the cells in the body, through receptor sites, and it's those chemicals in the cells that, with all of that particular survival chemistry in it, shall we say, that causes our upset, distressed state. Did you know that?
Well, I've heard of it, and I didn't really correspond that your thoughts, just even having a thought about an election would immediately give me all of that reaction, but it makes sense.
Well, you see, because at that time, there was a sense of danger. In other words, even if you hadn't thought much about it, there's a threat. Now what's going to happen to us? What is he going to do? What sort of, you didn't think all those thoughts necessarily, but the whole package of this person and what he represents or what he may or may not do is a threat to my well-being and my way of life and my beliefs. In other words, and that all happened instinctively, just as it does if an animal's about to jump in your window. That's instinctive. You don't sit there and say, okay, let me see. What I'm pretty sure is this won't work out if this tiger jumps in my window. In other words, this happens just in a flash. So in a flash, you sent the signal of danger. And the brain, being very responsive, doesn't go, oh, I'm busy now, I'll get to this later. It takes you at your word, and it doesn't evaluate it, and it doesn't say, are you sure you're really in danger? Do I really need to, create all this chemistry or not? There's not any of that kind of intellectual or any other kind of evaluation. It takes your thoughts at your word, so to speak. And it creates this chemistry. And it's this chemistry that is the real cause of our upset. And when you understand this connection between, shall we say, our psychology and our physiology, that's how we can make the statement that another person doesn't cause our upset, because nobody gets to get in there and mess with my brain chemistry but me. So you think, oh, so it's my response to the election results, not the election results themselves.
That makes sense.
Can you see the difference between the two?
Yes, I can.
You might say the election results are neutral. It's like this person is now the president-elect. That is just a neutral piece of information. And if it were just neutral like that, then your body wouldn't create all these stress hormones. It would just be, oh, we're having a nice day. But the interpretation or the response to this that says, this is going to be horrible, this is awful, something ghastly is now going to occur. It's that interpretation, and you might say interpretive response to the neutral piece of information, this man won an election. See, if you say it like that, okay, a person won an election. There's not anything threatening about that. But if you say, because this person won an election, terrible things are now going to happen. Well, then that is a threatening a response where you feel threatened as compared to a person won an election. That has an added element of danger that's now presumed. It's not known, but it's presumed. And again, your brain just responds to that interpretation or the presumed danger. It's doing such a good job of doing exactly what you ask for, which is protect me from this danger. And since this is not something that's a physical danger, you end up with all of this chemistry in your body, so to speak, feeling like a wreck and not having any idea. It's like, oh my gosh, I did this to myself.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I definitely don't want to blame it on myself, but what you're saying makes sense.
No. This isn't a matter of blame. This would be like if you ate a bite of your dinner tonight and then you said, well, it's my fault that my body is now digesting my food. It's like that would be a crazy statement to make. It's like, this hasn't anything to do with fault because there's no wrong making here. In other words, if you take a bite of food, then your body takes care of everything else that needs to happen about its digestion and eventual elimination. But you would hardly call yourself wrong because the system in your body worked like it's supposed to. So this is just a stress response system working like it's designed to work. That doesn't make you wrong, and it doesn't make the system wrong. Nothing's wrong about this. There's no fault finding. The place where we need to look is what it is that has made me decide that this is a dangerous situation in the first place, rather than just here's a man who has won an election. See, so now we have to get to how am I interpreting this? What am I believing about this? Because that's what has elicited this emotional response in the first place. So in other words,
I think that part is really easy. I could go on forever. I think we've all been watching the same the entire campaign, which has been just, and I think anyone would agree that it's been so incredibly bitter and divisive for the entire country, and especially he has just run on this platform of hate, and I don't think that's subjective. I mean, I think that's most people would agree with that. But
I think most people would agree with that as well. But it's not. This is the part that will cause you to stand up and take notice, and that will be a challenge to the things that you believe, because this is basically a challenge to what everyone believes. And this is the idea that the real distress that we feel when we look at another person's behavior, whether it's being, in this case, it's very extreme, impossible to miss behavior. But we could start out, I mean, there's such a long list that we can't go through them all, but let's just say we could start out in the general statement of egotistic, it's all about me. Fair to say?
Okay, yeah.
I mean, people have run out of adjectives describing Donald Trump's behavior, of narcissistic, it's all about me, and so on and so forth. And here's the thing that can allow some healing for you, and that is every one of us, to a very large degree, have our own brand of it's all about me egocentricity. In other words, when it's like, am I getting my way? Do people care about me? In other words, we've all grown up with, shall we say, a more refined version is life. My life is about my getting my way. What do you think about that?
Well, this is harder to come to terms with. I absolutely believe what you just said. I understand that, but I'm already taking something else that is used to describe him, like racist, and I feel like that I've never been that way. So I can understand some of it, but just there's so many things that I don't see in myself.
Well, nobody has said that every one of those you would see in yourself. You probably don't go around groping women. In other words, that's not something that would apply. But let's just look at the larger way to describe the behavior, which it's very separating. In other words, whether you would say, here is somebody who is against this group or this group or this group or this group, it has a separating quality to it, an us versus them.
Okay, that makes
Correct.
sense. Yes.
In other words, the details don't matter as much as the attitude of me versus them. Mm-hmm. Or something is acceptable and something that's not acceptable. Okay, so have you ever in your life been in a circumstance where some things you accepted and some you rejected? In other words, it could be about anything. It could be about people, it could be about beliefs, it could be about music or whatever. In other words, There were times in your life where this is okay with me, I accept this, but this I don't. This behavior I object to. This particular behavior is, beyond whatever the limits are for me, and I wouldn't possibly condone it or something like that. In other words, you can see where, again, it's not extreme and huge and glaring. But in your own life, you can say, well, it's actually true that I don't accept everything that crosses my path.
Okay. Okay, I can accept that.
Okay, and so there's there's so much of this is unconscious to us that it seems bizarre to try to compare these two. But what's really happening is that when you see somebody mistreat someone else, that's another way you can say it. It's like there appears to be great mistreatment of whether it's groups or races or other countries or whatever it might be. There's a mistreatment, there's an ostracism, there's a judgment. And so then we ask ourselves, have you ever judged anything and wanted it not to be in your life? It doesn't
Of
have to be
course.
a whole race of people. It can just be anything. It can just be anything at all. It can be somebody you know. It can be somebody's behavior. It can be something where it makes sense to you to push that away from you.
Yes.
Like, I don't
Yeah.
want this in my life. I object to this. And there's a part of us that feels guilty and disturbed anytime we are in that rejecting, judgmental, I I deem you unacceptable, whether it's a person or a situation or a what. So, is it possible for you to see? I realize this is a big stretch, and this will be a big stretch for everybody, but even if a tiny little seed is planted, it will be worth it. Can you see that Donald Trump does in a vastly exaggerated way what all of us in one way or the other do as normal citizens, so to speak, just as human beings? In other words, we've been judgmental, we've been rejecting, we've decided this is okay with me, this I don't want to have anything to do with. It's just on a so much smaller scale. But that does not keep the guilt and the pain of guilt from being created inside our own awarenesses. Have you ever actually felt guilty about your treatment of somebody, or you're kind of pushing them away from you?
Well, I was raised Catholic, so I feel I have a very strong relationship with guilt, and I know it very well. Yes, absolutely. You know, even as you're talking, I'm actively trying to to not to listen to what you're saying, but not even relate it in my mind back to Trump, because I resist the any kind of affiliation with him or his actions. It's so hard for my brain to say, well, I have done this, even if it is on a much smaller scale. It's just really, really hard. I feel like so many of me and my friends feel the same way, that we've worked our whole lives to try to be better people, to try not to do these types of things and be that kind of person.
Right.
So maybe right there, that's a big judgment.
I was going to say that might possibly give you something um, to chew on, so to speak. And it's fascinating to me that he really is a larger than life version of, like a gigantic ego, and the rest of us have just sort of normal sized egos, but they all operate the same way, which is we divide things into what we find acceptable and what we don't find acceptable. And we judge the things that we think aren't acceptable, even though ours might be very low key, comparatively speaking, but the pain that it causes us is the same. In other words, when we reject other situations or people or whatever, it hurts us. And that pain, which is mostly unconscious for most people, will be, you might say, driven up to the surface of consciousness on occasions like this. And you might say, well, I hate that. I don't want any pain that I'm creating for myself to be brought up into consciousness. But the problem is it can't be healed unless I'm conscious of it. So it's almost like when I see it from my perspective, which I don't pretend like is going to be a normal perspective, there's something about this that could be hugely healing for a whole lot of people if they recognize the process that's underway, which is if we could all use this as an opportunity to be introspective and we look and we see what this exaggerated version of bias or prejudice or this is okay with me or this is not okay, you look at it and you say, it's so ugly when I look at it out here. And then you think somewhere in our own hearts, we accuse ourselves of our own, shall we say, normal sized version of our judgments, of the things that we don't accept about ourselves or others, the things that we reject, the ideas, the people, the circumstances, things about ourselves. And that causes us pain that we're not even aware of. And ultimately, it's that guilt that's being triggered in us that's the cause of our great distress. It's like we're really distressed about our own attack, whether it appears to be others or ourselves. That's where our own pain comes from. Is that just the wildest idea you've ever heard?
It is a little bit. I'm trying to walk with you on this one, but I'm still struggling because I just think I think our fears with him seem warranted. So I mean, if we stop rejecting and forgive ourselves of the guilt we feel, does that mean he's no longer the president-elect?
No, he'll still be the president-elect, but you can be a citizen of this country and you can be comfortable and you can be helpful and you can be at great peace and you can conduct your life in a way that's the happiest way possible. In other words, other people can still be being however they're being and he can still be the president, but you don't have to have your peace of mind wrecked. Don't you think that would be a good idea?
Yes, that's what I want.
Yes, in other words,
I have 4 long years ahead of me with
absolutely
my
you can't you can't make him not be the president, but you are 100% in charge of your peace of mind. You see, if you let outside people, situation, forces, circumstances get to decide whether you're at peace, powerful, abundant, okay, valuable, if something outside you is deciding that, that's awful. And you're always going to feel threatened and you're always going to be small and it's never going to work out so that your life can be the happy life that you deserve. But if I can somehow reconfigure this in my mind to say, yes, I see something really big going on here. What I do and what I recommend to anybody is rather than, isn't he the most awful person who's going to ruin everything? I immediately want to go right to, what does this tell me about something that I'm doing that I need to take a look at, let go of, stop feeling guilty about, and so on and so forth. In other words, so I will let something like this be a springboard or a reminder that I'm still attacking myself or someone else, even if it's privately in my own heart of hearts, it's still doing the damage. So if you look at it this way, it's like, okay, the fact is he will be the president, we presume, unless something untoward occurs. So you think, but it is my responsibility. In other words, if I want to do my part for my fellow human beings, for this country, the best thing I can do is be genuinely at peace in this place of great turmoil, because that's the most helpful thing I can do for everybody else. In other words, if I run around being frantic, it's kind of like I put my agreement that frantic is the only response I can have to this. But if I could learn to realize there's something going on with me that his behavior has triggered, but the actual loss of peace is within me, that this is a process within me, I'm going to get to work on that so that I can present, you might say, a peaceful human being going happily about their work, regardless of these circumstances out here. That's where the real power is. That's where the helpfulness can be. Can you see that? What a terrible place to be, for your life always to be at the effect of something that you seem not to be able to control.
Yeah.
That's
I don't want that.
No, that's being a victim. And we aren't victims. We're not victims of anything except our own programming. And at some other time, and maybe I'll talk with someone else in more detail about it's our early programming about our guilt, about what's not right with us, what we were taught when we were so little we don't even remember it, that we've done wrong, that where we've hurt somebody or we've hurt somebody's feelings. Until those old hurts and our old wounds come into our awareness and we let go of that and the guilt that we surround our own behavior with, then that wound can be triggered by almost anything that comes along. So if we can go, okay, I want to let this be an occasion for my own healing, because I do want to be helpful to my fellow human being. And I can do that by demonstrating that I have the power through changing my mind. You see, I feel the emotions first that these thoughts have generated, my own thoughts about what's the matter with me, so to speak, because all the focus is on, look what's the matter with him. But secretly in our heart of hearts, we think there's some stuff the matter with me. It doesn't look the same. It may not be racist. It might not be, I want to deport all Muslims, but there's still places where we feel guilty about our behavior. That's the place where this has in common. It's not the details of the behavior. It's unkind or hurtful behavior or thoughts towards someone else or ourselves. So doesn't it make sense that what you want to be is the strong and powerful and valuable and very precious being that you are, and that you get to stand in your peace and your power because you know how to regard yourself regardless of what's going on outside you? Don't you think that's a much, much better place to be in?
Well, that definitely resonates with me, because what I know for sure is that this is not a one-time deal. We have now, again, 4 more years, and I can't have him controlling my peace of mind. So a lot of this, that one point in and of itself has made me realize that I need to take a look at myself and figure out what exactly this is triggering, because...
Absolutely. Well, you see, if you use the generic statement where you say, I believe this man is, use any phrase that's generic, is mistreating other people, or judging other people, or rejecting other people. In other words, any of those words are generic words that describe the specific behavior that you see. Is that true?
Yes.
In other words, it's separative, it's separatist kind of behavior, like dividing things into, this is okay with me, this is not okay with me. And so this is where, without fault finding, without wrong making, you're going to go, have I ever done that? Have I ever decided somebody's not okay? Have I ever decided somebody's behavior is not okay with me? Have I ever decided that I think their decisions are very foolish and I judge them? Like, has that ever once happened? Of course.
Yes, but aren't you supposed to stand up for what's right, or is there nothing there's nothing like that in your world?
Well, when you say stand up for what's right, what does that mean to you?
For example, if you said if someone's behavior is wrong. So what if someone is doing something, for example, like Trump's behavior with women, right? That's something you might stand up for and say, no, that's not right. That's not how you treat people. Something like that. I don't know. Isn't that what we've always been taught?
Well, yes. In other words, certainly we would agree that that's not a good idea. In other words, that is a mistreatment of someone. And I mean, I guess there's some people who think that's fine, but there's certainly millions of people who would not think that's fine. And so this is not a matter that you suddenly are supposed to think that's a good idea. You're supposed to generically say, okay, there's mistreatment. I see mistreatment going on. Have I ever in my life mistreated myself or someone else? Not in the same way. Not related to women, not related to that, but it's like, have I ever been less than loving and less than appropriate in my choices and my behavior? Probably.
Yeah.
You see? So it's not that it's the identical behavior, it's the underlying disrespect. Let's call it that's being very disrespectful, as is much of the other behavior of our fellow human beings. Now, I'm going to ask you a really big question. You're a human being, right?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever been disrespectful of you? Have you ever decided, well, maybe you don't really count and somebody else is more important than you are, or maybe their needs are more important than you? Do you feel like there are times when something like that has occurred?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so in a way you think, have you ever been disrespectful of anybody else? Have you ever treated somebody in a way that indicated you didn't much care about what went on with them?
Yes.
In other words, even if not in your actions, in your mind.
Yeah. Oh, in my mind, yes.
There you go. So it's like, it's not confined to actions. The thoughts are the things that are important. So you realize, well, I've rejected some people in my mind. I've kind of thought, what a mess they are, even including Donald Trump. In other words, I've condemned people in my mind. I have made it very clear that those aren't people that I would want to hang out with or be with or something like that. So and that's not respectful. But the most important part of this is our lack of respect for ourselves, because we've learned from very early on some very unfortunate ideas about ourselves. And the idea, like you just said, I grew up in an environment where I was taught to be guilty, or to think I was guilty, or to consider myself guilty. What a tragic thing. And every single human being has that issue to one degree or the other. Whether we're aware of it or not is not relevant. We all do. So you think, well, that's pretty disrespectful to consider myself, myself, a valuable, precious, beyond description presence of love and power. That's what you actually are. And to decide that that's guilty, that's pretty big mistreatment, and we've all done it. Are you speechless?
Yeah. I am.
So can,
I am.
so can you begin to see that we'll all agree, well, I guess we won't all agree, but many people will agree that his behavior is unconscionable and that we would all think our behavior is wildly nicer and better and cleaner and more polite and more appropriate and more considerate and everything else than his. In other words, like a lot of us would agree to that. But somewhere in our minds, we've got a lot of the same judgments and rejections and resistances and lack of acceptance and so on. It's like underneath, there's some commonality to there. The degree may appear to be different, but there's some commonality as human beings trying to stay safe, trying to be okay, some things that we learn. Could you adopt that idea?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Okay. And so what I want you to do is realize you're not guilty for any of that. All of those things are certainly mistakes because it ruins our peace of mind, but you are not guilty. To be guilty means you would have ruined unity. You would have ruined the universe. You have ruined all that is, and clearly that hasn't happened. So take a deep breath right now and know that you are, and this is beyond the shadow of a doubt, nothing that you have done or said or thought or believed or wanted has changed the fact that you are a beloved presence. You are loving, you are loved, you are precious. None of that has changed because we've made great mistakes in our thinking and in our behavior, but the living presence of us remains immaculate. And that's what we want to do, is to realize it has remained immaculate. I've certainly made lots of mistakes, but I am not guilty. Nobody's guilty. Mistaken, yes. Guilty and needing to be punished forever, no. And so you think, okay, I'm going to breathe deeply and I'm going to know, yes, I've made lots of these same sorts of rejecting and this is okay with me, this is not okay, separatist kind of thinking. That's all in the past. I can say, okay, now I'm going to look at all of this with different eyes. I'm going to see this in a different way. I can see that everybody, whether it's Donald Trump or myself, who engages in separatist thinking and how we so hurt ourselves doing that, it's I can let all my condemnation go, and I can realize we're all calling for love. We're all desperately wanting to know we're still loved and lovable, even Donald Trump. He's making a desperate call for that in his behavior. And because nobody who feels marvelous about themselves behaves that way. So you think we're all in this together. We all truly want to know that we're beloved and loved, and we are. And kind of end of story. So what do you think? Tell me how you feel now.
Well, I feel 100% better than I did when I first started talking to you. I've never really thought of Donald Trump in that way. I've never thought that we're all in this together. It has always been this us versus them type of thought. It's a very separatist type of thought, and I never realized that I needed to change that.
Right. And when you do, when you realize that all unloving behavior is a call for help, and that as we answer that call for help and answer that, like in my own mind, I can be loving. This doesn't mean that you think the behavior is a good idea. This has nothing to do with behavior. You can just recognize that anybody who is unloving in their behavior is desperately calling for love because they think they've ruined themselves. Now, are they conscious of that? Often no. But it's true, nobody behaves in an unloving way unless they feel some very desperately awful things about themselves. Because why would you? Why would somebody who feels at peace themselves, who knows they're beloved, who knows that all's well in their lives, what earthly purpose or reason would they have for attacking others? They couldn't do it if they wanted to. Which means that in their own minds and in their own hearts, they're terrified, they feel like they've ruined themselves, and they're desperately asking for help. And so if your own mind, you think, well, not only do I need to offer peace to myself, I need to offer it to everyone else as well, because who would I deprive of peace? Anybody that you would deprive of peace, you would deprive it of yourself, because what we want for others is what we experience ourselves. What do you think about that?
I need to get to work.
Yeah. And so you think, okay, well, maybe I've actually learned something that I didn't expect to learn from this encounter.
Yes.
But it will serve you well. And so if we can just all take a look around and have that attitude that anybody who is angry or upset or distressed or behaving in an unkind way, nobody who feels safe and beloved behaves that way. It just indicates the fear, it indicates the guilt, it indicates the lack of understanding, but it never indicates their lack of value and their right to be treated lovingly, because they still are a loving presence. Even if they've forgotten it, you've forgotten it, I've forgotten it, we've all forgotten it, and we're all now in a place of trying to wake up and remember this. So there you go.
Okay, wow. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, and let me know, write me an email in a week or two just as you decide to see all this differently, and let me know how it goes.
Okay, I definitely will. Thank you so much, Carol.
Okay, hon. Bye.
Bye.
Well, wow. To feel 100% better is about all we could hope for. What do you think about that? In such a short time, she was able to calm her emotions rather than fight against them, always to no avail, and to see the commonality of her situation with her former enemy, Donald Trump. Did you hear her tone soften as she could realize that although the actions and, shall we say, magnitude of Trump's transgressions in her eyes and hers were very different, at their core they were the same. They involved judgment, rejection, resistance, and the guilt that brings. So no one here is wrong, just misguided, and we all can learn from this. So if you want to be helpful and aid in the healing process of both yourself and our turbulent world, then standing peacefully and as a beacon of comfort is what's called for. So now don't forget, if you have an issue you would like to discuss with me, send in your challenge to findingpeace@carolhowe.com, and one will be chosen for next week. So goodbye, my friends. I'm so glad you joined us, and I so look forward to your tuning in next week for another important healing session. Have a wonderful week.